Hello, I'm Ipo Swords, and today I'm going to be beating a dead horse. The particular dead horse which I will be beating is the same one which Matt Easton, Todd, and Skallagrim have recently been beating as well. And that is that medieval weapons, and indeed Renaissance weapons and weapons of other periods, were not perfect. And I'm going to be using this as an example to illustrate that. This example comes from around the year 1490 and is probably Flemish. Considering that the Renaissance in the lowlands started around 1500 to 1550, this is indeed medieval, by at least art definitions. This example is not perfect, and I don't simply mean the fact that it is quite deteriorated. If you look at it from this angle, and I'll show close-ups in a moment, you will note that the blade is not actually in line with the hilt or the guard. It is slightly off-centered. This example is a bollock dagger, and this particular bollock dagger is middling in terms of quality. It's not extremely high-end like some of them, but it's also not basic. It has a guard, the guard has some decorative elements, the blade, despite being single-edged, is relatively pointy and thus usable for the thrust. It is somewhere between, let's say, peasantry and knightly. There's every reason for it to be perfect, if perfect was the quality that was desired. But it wasn't. This was, in every way, enough. This was a good enough level of symmetry, of evenness, and indeed, of affixing the blade to the hilt. Medieval qualities, medieval values were not the same as ours today, especially if you look at reproductions. The customer today has very different demands to the customer of yesteryear. And the same can be said not only of weapons in Europe, but all over the world. I have swords from Iran, like the ones behind me. I have swords from India. Imperfections are very common even in very well-made swords. This imperfection, that is to say, blades that aren't perfectly aligned with the hilt, is one that is particularly common, and it's one that would have functional impacts. Edge alignment is largely determined by how well you can index your blade to your hilt to your hand, and that's made a lot more difficult when the blade isn't perfectly aligned. And yet, we see poorly aligned blades in a myriad of swords and daggers from the era. The simple fact of the matter is that our modern standards don't apply to historical thinking, to historical objects, or indeed to historical values. While there are some exceptional items which show extreme symmetry, often made for royalty or other extremely wealthy clients, the vast majority are made like this. There will be small issues to our eyes that would have been perfectly fine to ignore 530 years ago. One of the things that antiques force us to do is to put ourselves in the mind of the person who would have owned them however many hundreds of years ago. The modern reproduction market doesn't have this issue. It's only concerned with the modern customer and the modern maker, and making sure that their standards are met and a price is acceptable. Back in the day, because these objects were actually used, sometimes those standards could be relaxed in order to meet the actual market demand. This is only one of many thousands of bollock daggers from its era. They were made en masse, without machinery, by hand. There are going to be imperfections, and not only are they acceptable and accepted, but they should be celebrated and researched, not ignored. We should know exactly how flawed antiques were to gain a better understanding of how those antiques were used. Like I said, a poorly aligned blade will affect your edge alignment, and that is something that is relevant to understand if you are trying to, for example, recreate how these swords were used in a HEMA context. If we are to pretend that medieval swords were perfect, we're going to get a skewed understanding of how they actually performed, and that will skew the way you think about the period. I know that everyone else has already made all of these points, and I know there are cultural differences between different locations about what level of perfection is acceptable. In fact, I touched on that in a previous video, just regarding how they're polished in some cultures, for example in Japan. But it is worth showing an example of an actual medieval antique which is not perfect. The others might be able to point to museums, but I am pointing very directly to an extant example that is in my hands. And that extant example tells me that medieval artifacts were not perfect, and now I'm telling you. That's all I've got for today. Until next time, stay sharp.